Hey there, Contractor Kev here with Overseas Contractor Academy, and this week we're doing part 2 of a 3-part series, and we were doing the good, bad, the ugly, and this is going to be the bad. And it's not terrible, of course no one died, no irreparable damage done, neither physically nor psychologically, but it was not a great experience. And to me, there's lessons to be learned. Failure is only failure when something negative happens and then you just walk away and give up and you blame oh, that was everyone else's fault, and it was just so negative, and I'm just gonna totally block it out. No, you gotta dig into that and learn from it. Then it's not a failure, it's a learning experience. And so we'll look at it that way. This bad experience I had, it was a learning experience, and by you listening along and kind of experiencing it vicariously, then maybe you guys can learn from it as well, or pick up something from it, who knows. But hopefully that's the goal, all right? So let's roll the bumper and get to it. Okay, so believe it or not, it was my 3rd contract right after I left. Such an awesome contract in Doha, Qatar. Great boss, great environment, Muslim friends and jiu-jitsu, and we would watch all the MMA fights together, and it was just all around awesome, right? But that whole time I did have a stateside girlfriend, and she was located in Southern California. And so I started looking, because I wanted to give the relationship a fair chance, right? So I started looking for stateside positions on the West Coast or near the West Coast. And what I ended up with, believe it or not, was a job in Hawaii, on Oahu, with the big shared Navy Air Force base out there. And it's also the Pacific Air Force's headquarters, which was specifically where I was working, was the budget office of the Pacific Air Force's headquarters building. So that's kind of where I ended up, and the plan was that I took this job in Hawaii. I would, stay in the hotel at first, figure out the island, figure out a place to stay. Once I had a house set up, the girlfriend would come out and live there. But things didn't go that route, unfortunately, because the job, pretty early on, I was getting these signals that this job was not going to be something I would stay at. And so I had to be honest with my girlfriend at the time and say, look, it's probably better for now for me to continue to take the measure of what's going on here, and you stay in California until I'm really sure of how this is going to work out. So I think there were a couple of factors that went into this going bad. But the primary one was that I was an outsider, and I didn't realize that Hawaii was like that. Now, if you're Hawaiian, don't take offense. Don't, send me hate mail or whatever. Be honest with yourself. If someone is not from Hawaii and they're a mainlander and they don't understand Hawaiian culture, you definitely treat them like an outsider quite a lot. I mean, either a tourist or an outsider, those are your two options really. So the Hawaiians, if you don't know, if you're not from Hawaii, don't have friends that are Hawaiian, they actually have a word for this. And when you're a mainlander, as in you're from the main part of the US, and you don't really understand Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian way of looking at things, and of course they have their own language, it is very much its own country. And I made the mistake of thinking, well, Hawaii's a state, it's going to be like the US, and it's not. It is not at all. So I basically was an outsider, and they actually have a word for this in Hawaii, believe it or not, and it's called haole. And believe me, I was the most haole person in Hawaii at that time, I think, because of course, not only was I stateside, mainland born and raised, but I had also been all these places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Qatar and all this, and going to Hawaii, Hawaiians they have their own mindset, and they have their own way of thinking and processing life and doing things. And even the way they speak English, there's quite a lot of them that will speak more of a pidgin form of English, depending on how Hawaiian they are. So I was definitely an outsider, and I got treated like an outsider, and I did not expect it. Like, I didn't think that would happen because, you know, in my head, you're a US state, and secondly, I'm on a military base, and I'm ex-military, and I definitely know how to get along with military types, but just, it didn't work out that way, and I was the outsider. So that was kind of like the first big, like, bump in the road for me. Was like, oh wow, okay, like I'm not actually totally welcome here. Like I'm a bit of an outsider, and I've got to try and prove myself. Okay, and the second thing was that I had a coworker, a young female, attractive, mid-20s, a gal named Marissa that was local and very connected in Hawaii. Her aunt worked in the human resources department of our company. Well, when I got hired, Marissa found out how much I was hired for, and of course I had been hired on for much more than she was being paid, and this infuriated her, and I didn't know that. I mean, what fault is that of mine? Like, if you want to get paid more, negotiate better. It's basically my sentiment on that. But I was also someone that had, you know, all this military experience and overseas experience, and I had contractor experience, so I had like a decade more experience to bring to the table than she did. You know, if you count military time, it's more like 15, 20 years more experience. So I was making more than her, but that didn't matter. To her, all she saw was that I was this outsider, howdy dude that came in and got hired at 20 more grand a year than her. And that really, really pissed her off. And so, unbeknownst to me, she went about basically trying to ruin any perceptions of me that might be positive. And so I've since kind of learned that, you know, guys tend to confront each other directly. Like, you know, if we don't like someone, we make it very well known and like, hey, you're an asshole, whatever. Women tend to more engage in reputational damage and reputational attacks. Now, obviously, you can't say that about all women, nor can you say all guys are confrontational, but I'm just saying it's a tendency. These are tendencies we're talking about. So again, don't write me with the social justice crap and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. But anyway, so she went about just thorough reputational wrecking. And unfortunately, she was the one training me for the job. So she would, you know, be purposely vague on teaching me stuff. And when I couldn't immediately pick it up the very first time she explained it vaguely, afterwards she would give like after action kind of reports to the head civilians in charge and say like, oh, he's real slow to learn, he's not getting it, I'm not sure he's a good fit, you know, he's just not one of us kind of thing, because they were all Hawaiian. Like everyone in that office was Hawaiian except me. And so that did not go over well. Furthermore, everyone was female except for me. And again, that did not go over well. There were supposed to be 2 military guys in charge running all those housewife, mid-50s, overweight, kind of angry, mid-level GS type people there that just infighting and bickering and all this kind of stuff, which again, I'm not saying that men can't do that, but you know, men tend to be like out in the open and confront each other like, you're an asshole, you're a dick, you know, that kind of thing. Whereas this was all this like undermining, backstabbing stuff that was just happening all the time between all these different females, and I'm just like, ugh. I couldn't handle it. I was not prepared for that. So unfortunately, so my reputation was being undermined the entire time to the civilian boss. There was no military. There was supposed to be a military 05. He was deployed. He had gotten orders like, hey, you gotta go overseas. So he went somewhere overseas to do a 6-month job, and his second in charge guy, an 04, a major, he also got sent to a different overseas location. And so there were no military oversight in that whole office, and there were no military people, and there were no men. So I was there in like GS drama type thing, and it was me and 2 other contractors, both of which were local females in their 20s that were very much participating in all the drama and all this crap. So it was just a terrible fit for me in that way. So in addition to being undermined to the local bosses, I was being undermined even to the company, because she was firing off emails like, oh, you know, Kev's just not a right fit for this, and you know, he doesn't quite get it, and all this kind of crap. But meanwhile, she's trying to be super cool to my face, like, oh, let's go to lunch, let's do this, let's hang out, you know, let's watch the fights this weekend. And I didn't realize at the time, but basically anything I said to her, she would twist it and then take it back to the people at work or send it back to my company. So if I said like, oh, you know, I talked to the head guy for the country, his name was Joe, like, oh, I talked to Joe last time, you know, he's pretty cool, I get along with him, but he just seemed real distracted. And then she would run back to him and be like, oh, Kev said, like, you know, you're not even paying attention, and you're not that great, you know, you know. And she would try to like bait me into stuff like that. And eventually towards the end I realized it, but it was too late. You know, that was just, by then, my reputation was gone, I was frustrated, my girlfriend was definitely not gonna move out there. And although Hawaii is such a beautiful place, like just landscape-wise and weather and all these things, man, it's friggin' paradise, beautiful. And there's a great like natural energy there. Unfortunately, like, I was Mr. Outsider, I couldn't get it, I, you know, would never fit in, all these things, and eventually I just knew I had to leave. And so I started looking for another job. And so that was kind of my bad experience. Not terrible, not scarring, but like basically I was out there for maybe 6 months and I had to leave. And it sucked because the job itself was not difficult and it paid pretty well and Hawaii was beautiful. But my experience with the people, and even the people outside of work, quite honestly, like I was either treated as a tourist or treated as a haole. And I was never really given the common respect that one would give someone, especially like I was raised quite a lot in the South. We moved all over the place, but quite a lot in the South. And, you know, we kind of believed in like Southern hospitality and treat people well. And especially in the military, you learn to get along with people from everywhere. But yeah, that didn't happen out there. So it was just kind of a bad experience for me. All right, so that's gonna wrap up part 2 of this series, The Bad. So hopefully you guys can learn from that. You know, God, if you ever do go to Hawaii, just be prepared for it. I did have one friend from Qatar that ended up in a job in Hawaii, in Maui. She experienced the exact same thing I did with the whole getting treated as an outsider and stuff. But lucky for her, she found a love interest in a local guy that his family went back 3 different generations. And so he had super connections in Maui. And so as soon as she hooked up with him and then married him, that was it. She was welcomed, and her whole social dynamic changed in the way she was treated, and she had his last name, and now like, oh, you're great now. And she would write to me emails of like how remarkable it was, how fast that changed for her, the way she was being treated. But at any rate, let that be a lesson to you. Hopefully you can get something out of it. But yeah, Hawaii, a beautiful place, great for vacation, different kind of world if you're gonna work there. Hopefully you can be around some military guys if you're not a local. But that's gonna be it really for this week for the bad. And next week will be the ugly, which was truly, truly ugly. So until next time, roll up your sleeves, go to the website, man, get the course, get the information, get overseas, change your life, all right? See you next week.